It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in Manhattan, the kind of gray, dripping day that usually dulled even the most vibrant skyline. But that day, none of it mattered to Richard Moore. Richard, 47-year-old billionaire and founder of one of America's top real estate development firms, stepped off his private jet without any of the usual entourage. He had told no one he was coming home. Not his assistants, not the driver, not even the house staff at his sprawling Connecticut estate. It was a last-minute decision. Something had been bothering him for weeks, an itch in his mind he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was fatherhood guilt. Maybe it was something deeper. Either way, he needed to see his 7-year-old son, Caleb. Since his wife's sudden death 3 years ago, Richard had buried himself in work. Caleb had been left mostly in the care of nannies and maids, especially one maid named Loretta, Athone African-American. Woman in her early 40s, with a quiet voice and a deeply maternal presence. Loretta had been working for the Moore family for almost 5 years, staying even after the tragedy that had left the mansion silent and Richard emotionally distant. Richard didn't dislike Loretta. In fact, he had barely noticed her. To him, she was like the furniture, reliable, steady, always there. But what he was about to see that day would change everything. As his black SUV turned quietly into the long driveway of the estate, electric. Gates slowly opened. The house stood there, massive, cold, beautiful. Rain tapped against the glass as he stepped out, carrying only a small briefcase. He dismissed the driver and walked to the door himself. No one was expecting him. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt the immediate warmth and scent of vanilla and fresh laundry. Someone was home. There was no sound at first, just the ticking of the antique clock in the foyer and the low hum of the heating system. He walked down the corridor and paused near the kitchen. That's when he heard the voices. One voice was high-pitched and energetic. It was definitely Caleb's. The other was deeper, softer, and unmistakably Loretta's. Richard frowned. They weren't in the kitchen. The voices were coming from the living room. He walked quietly down the hallway, his expensive shoes silent on the hardwood floor. As he neared the doorway, he slowed. He could hear laughter now. Not just any laughter. His son's real, belly-deep, unfiltered laughter, sound Richard hadn't heard in months, maybe years. He stepped into the room quietly, ready to surprise them both. And that's when he froze. Loretta was sitting on the floor, her legs crossed in front of the fireplace. She wore a simple white blouse and navy slacks. Caleb sat opposite her, also cross-legged, holding a plastic teacup. They were having a tea party, but not just any tea party. Between them was a low wooden table draped in a small checkered cloth. On it were small plastic pastries, cups, saucers, and even a notepad. Where Caleb had scribbled something, there were paper crowns on their heads. Caleb's was crooked dand. Loretta was speaking in a full British accent, pretending to be the Queen of England. "And what would your highness like to eat for dessert today?" "Chocolate, biscuits, and a marshmallow," Caleb shouted. "Excellent choice, my prince." Loretta reached into a small basket behind her and pulled out real chocolate chip cookies and a single large marshmallow, placing them on a tiny plastic plate as if it were fine china. Caleb clapped his hands. That moment, so warm, so absurd, so full of life, held Richard completely still. He wasn't angry, wasn't confused. He was stunned. Loretta noticed him first. She turned her head toward the doorway, her smile fading slightly. But instead of jumping to her feet or apologizing, she gave him a respectful nod and said softly, "Good afternoon, Mr. Moore. You're home early." Caleb turned next, eyes wide, then jumped up and ran to his father. "Daddy!" Richard kneeled to catch him, his arms wrapping around the boy automatically. For a moment, nothing existed except that embrace. "Hey, buddy," Richard murmured. "I missed you. I missed you too. We were having royal tea." Richard looked over Caleb's shoulder at Loretta, who had now stood up and removed her paper crown. "I see that," he said slowly. "Looks like it was a lot of fun." Caleb looked back at Loretta and whispered, "Can she stay and finish dessert with me?" Richard was about to say something polite and generic. But then he caught something in Loretta's expression, Not fear, not embarrassment, but pride, as if she believed in what she was doing, as if she knew that it mattered. He nodded. Of course. Loretta smiled and sat down again, this time more relaxed. Richard stood quietly, watching as his son returned to the little tea table. Something about this scene moved him in a way he didn't expect. He realized to his shame that he had no idea what his son liked. Not his favorite cartoon, his favorite cookie, or what he dreamed about, but Loretta. She knew it all. Later, that evening, after Caleb had gone to bed, Richette asked Loretta to stay for a moment in the study. She came in quietly, her hands folded. "Please, sit," he offered. She did. Richette took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." Loretta blinked. "Sir, I assumed you were just the help. But what I saw today, what you do for Caleb, it's more than I ever expected." I didn't know he was capable of laughing like that anymore. Loretta sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "He missed you. Every day. But he also missed being a child. I just try to give him that back." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. "He calls you Miss Loretta with so much affection." "I love him like my own," she admitted softly. "He's a beautiful boy. He just needs time, attention, and someone to care." "I failed him," Richard confessed. Loretta shook her head. "He lost someone too. Grief does strange things. But it's not too late." The words hung in the air like a promise. Over the next few weeks, everything began to shift. Richard started working fewer hours. He sat with Caleb during breakfast. He asked him questions. He helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and even joined one of Loretta's tea parties wearing a crown of his own. Loretta became more than just a maid. She became a trusted confidant, a steady hand, and in some ways, the soul of the house. One evening after dinner, Richard stood by the window watching Caleb run in the backyard with their dog. Loretta walked up beside him. "He's different." "Now," Richard said quietly, "happier, stronger. We needed you," she replied. "And you came back." He turned to her. "You've been the reason he stayed afloat. I can never repay you for that." "You just did," she said. Being his father, silence settled between them again, but it was comfortable this time. Richard looked at her closely. He hadn't really seen her until now, the wisdom in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the quiet dignity that never asked for recognition. "Loretta," he said, "I don't know what your long-term plans are, but I hope you'll consider staying with us, not as a maid, but as part of this family." She smiled softly. "I already am, sir. I always have been." That night when Richard tucked Caleb into bed, the boy asked, "Daddy, can Miss Loretta live here forever?" Richard chuckled. "If she wants to." Caleb nodded happily, hugging his teddy bear. From that day on, the Moore household was no longer defined by grief and silence, but by laughter, warmth, and healing, and the billionaire who once ran from fatherhood had finally come home.